Yeah, I've got all the translations, all the various songs of Dumuzid up, and like I'd remembered that they were very passionate. I'd forgotten how blatantly pornographic a number of them are.
Yeah.
It's it's a little bit like, oh man, there's one all about churning butter. Ishtar comes over because Dumuzid's gonna churn her butter real good, and it's all about churning the butter. Oh man.
Well, I'm going to use a different tradition that I've noticed that has
Mm,
many parallels here. Um, that I'm much more well versed in the sense that like I've studied it much deeper than I've done the Sumerian ones at this time. I have read many of these Sumerian and Babylonian stories and myths and songs and that kind of stuff. But it's been years, and my knowledge and understanding of things has grown substantially since that time period. And you'll see why I'm comparing it in so many different ways here for a moment, and in a moment. Um, so I'm going to use Nordic mythology, and I'm going to use Balder and his wife, Nanna,
mm.
which should already give you a hint a little bit for where some of this is going. There's something called in the Poetic Edda, Balder's Dreams. I wonder if there's any parallel inside of the Mesopotamian tradition whatsoever.
Nobody knows. The only Baldur I really know much is Baldur's Gate, and I didn't even did play the third one. Uh, that's a different thing, I expect.
So what we do know on top of this is that if you look at it, Balder is someone who's having dreams, much like what we're going to be talking about later on. That has to do with Dumuzid's dream, I assume, in one of them that has to lead to his, you know, fall into the underworld and whatnot. And it's all premonition of what's going to be happening to him, and he has to have it interpreted and that kind of thing. And everybody knows what it is, and there are actions that are taken to try to prevent this. And eventually, of course, it fails and ends up in the underworld, and someone is sent there to resurrect him, to come get him back, and whatnot. And in that particular notion of things, they are told that you could, the goddess of the underworld, another parallel, that's there. Her name is Hel, Hel, right? And she informs the we'll say, what's the best term for it? Messenger of the gods that have come in the stead of these other people and whatnot, much much like the creations that Enki made for Inanna, and that kind of thing. Because he has to use a horse to jump over the gates instead of going through the gates like they did in
Hmm.
Phantom or Fly or whatever the deal is. And he takes Odin's horse here. So another wise being taking over that. The parallels just keep adding up and up, which is why I'm going to go into what I think some of that stuff you're talking about with what the sexual components are in a moment. Um, when you get to this, you also realize that Balder represents like summer. All right. And you want summer if you're in the Nordic countries because summer is the time period where everything's much easier to survive and deal with and all that other stuff. Whereas inside of Mesopotamia, it's the opposite. You don't want summer, at least in the case of Dumuzid, because that's when the milk spoils. That's when it can't have it stay there and whatnot. So it's just an inverse in terms of the times, but it's the exact same notion of things for when one dies and when one comes back for it, and that kind of stuff. In one of the stories related to Balder, he is competing for his wife, Nana, just like how Dumuzid had to do so with the farmer for what's going on there. And eventually we know who wins, of course, but Nana ends up with Balder, and that kind of thing. But not before they get into this huge rabble back and forth and blah, blah, blah. That's one of the major differences between it uh, on there. And it is that at the end of the dreaming, excuse me, at the end of the marriage one with the Nana, and then you have where they kind of end up as friends at the end of it and all that other stuff. Whereas in one variant of the story where they're fighting for her attention, they literally are actually physically fighting for her, and that kind of thing. And again, she has to be convinced to go with Balder over her first choice, which is the other one, Hodr, inside of it, which is just like what happens in that. So here's another parallel that pops up. And there's also the crying and the lamenting of things with it. When Dumuzid is dead in an underworld, there's supposed to be all these tears for him and blah blah blah. While the condition in which to bring Balder back from the dead is that there can be not one thing, there can be nothing in the entirety of the universes and all the various different aspects in the Nordic mythology that do not weep for his return, Balder's return. If that does not happen, then he has to stay dead just like everybody else in the underworld. So you see this that happens there on that. There's a lament thing with it. And the point is that if you go over and over and over, even more further and stuff with it, you start seeing all of these parallels that are just absolutely bizarre in terms of like how much there are with it. It's not just like, oh, there's a handful of them, whatever. That's true of most mythologies. No, there's like a detailed list of things that are basically the same. It's really, really bizarre for what's going on there on that front. And inside of the Nordic tradition, they have we have Odin, okay? And if you take Odin, In is literally just a suffix and whatnot. And then you have the prefix, which is Other, something along that for how it's pronounced and whatnot, which means like frenzied or ecstasy or the spirited one, something like that. And when you combine the two of them together and that kind of stuff. So if you look at it from a completely allegorical sense, Odin represents this divine frenzied state. Sometimes sexual in nature, it's compared to that. Sometimes battle frenzy in nature because he is a battle war god and whatnot. But in other words, it represents this altered state of consciousness of this divine frenzy that works through that. And as I've talked to you about briefly before, that's what happens inside of like this living resurrection tradition that I'm studying and working on and that kind of stuff with it is that there's this divine altered state of consciousness that comes in from that. And the best way that most people can understand this, no matter which gender that they are, for the representation of this particular part, is to make it so that way they go with some other very altered state of consciousness that most people partake in, which is in this case is sexual in nature. And so sex and any of the sexual metaphors, while they can actually mean that on a very, very much a straightforward, yes, that's what it is level, it can also imply this altered state of frenzied, divine frenzied consciousness that they're talking about here that you get when you go like people go into trances or when they have outer body experiences, as people have talked about in ancient traditions and that kind of stuff, regardless whether we believe that to be true or not today. I'm just talking about what they believed, how it worked, and all that other stuff with it. And so that's kind of what I personally believe when I was rereading some of these stories now and that kind of stuff that yes, there's definitely true actual sexual elements that are in there that are 100% only sexual, but there's also the deeper meaning of this frenzied state, this divine frenzied aspect of altered consciousness of some sort that seems to also be playing through as well, would be my general explanation for these things with it. Um, and in the case of the Nordic tradition and how it plays directly with the Mesopotamian one, we know through migratory patterns that the farming groups of people and whatnot, they came from that area of it and then moved up into the Nordic countries. We can trace this through different traveling. It took thousands of years for that to happen and whatnot in order to introduce farming to that area. So in order to make it so that way, people saying you can't have the same group of people that are doing it from that space of time and that distance and whatnot, that's not necessarily true. I'm not saying it happened. That's proving what I'm saying is much different than saying that these stories were because of what happened in Mesopotamia and they ended up there. But I'm saying to say that it can't have happened is not true either, is the point. We don't know. There is that element, and early 20th century scholars thought that that was the case for it. Then mid 20th to late 20th century scholars kind of dismissed that notion due to some of the things I already brought up. And now it's going full circle again because of genetics and migratory and other archaeological finds that have happened and whatnot, that it's become a possibility again. Not saying it occurred, but that it is at least that with it. And so you could have Balder potentially representing Dumuzid or something similar to Dumuzid in a lot of ways. And then you have Nana being Inanna. So,
That's interesting. I'd be very interested because I don't actually know much about Balder, uh, and that's not just Baldur's Gate jokes. I
no, I got you.
is uh I'm trying to remember. And in fact, instead of me trying to remember anything at all about him to see if there's stuff going similar, it might be good if we reintroduce Dumuzid, because we've talked about him before, but we didn't talk about him in his full context.
Right. That's why I wanted to kind
Because,
of lead into that and kind of also give it a little bit of
mhm,
an outline and where things might be going a little bit.
yeah. So Dumuzid's really interesting because, of course, he ends up being famous as the husband of Inanna or Ishtar, uh, and that's sort of a later development in the Dumuzid myth. Um, and you have sort of this quite natural progression of the character through the stories. Of course, all of his stories are so old that even the mature ones, we see the mature Inanna's descent into the underworld. Dumuzid's already a very mature character. He's very well known throughout the Sumerian region, and um, these are stories coming out like at the dawn of writing. And so, what happened before the dawn of writing? Who knows? Nobody knows. Could have
Oral
been
tradition.
anything. Oral tradition, wild, erotic oral traditions. So Dumuzid is a. It's hard to say that he starts as a god, um, because he does. He's in a sense he's always divine, but in the earliest incarnations, he seems to be not so much a god as an archetype. He is the pastoralist. He is um, he's like what everyone would want a pastoralist to be. He is what pastoralists would want themselves to be. He is and so of course they do
He's
pray
the
to
top of the
him.
pastoralist hierarchy.
Yeah, he becomes divine for anybody who wants their flocks to increase. Hey, I want flocks like Dumuzid. Hey, I want butter like Dumuzid. I want cheese like Dumuzid. Things like that. But there's so much. You see, the pre-writing period in Sumer is seems to have been this period of really forming an identity where the farmers are forming an identity and the pastoralists are forming an identity as because before that everyone had just been the same thing. um, I mean, agriculture had been developing for a while, but um, it seems like the cultural idea of being a farmer, being a pastoralist, or the third option, being a fisherman, which ties in a little bit here. Those three lifestyles in Sumer are becoming becoming identities. And this is where you get there's a famous debate poem where the grain goes up before either An or Enki or Enlil, one of the two, but the idea of grain goes up to the gods, and the idea of sheep goes up to the gods, and the two of them debate about which is better. And in that one,
Precursor to
yeah, and
the
it's
husband
Cain,
and wife. Yeah.
yeah, and it's Cain and Abel as well.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely. Yep.
and the just farmer versus pastoralist, I mean, it's kind of a meme now on the internet because of some anthropological work people are doing. Oh, farmers versus herdsmen. um, and I guess, I mean, you go back not that long to um, you've got the ranchers and the farmers out west. It's a very long running um,
Theme.
conflict. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a conflict, it's a theme, but this is really the origins when people are coming to understand themselves as either farmers or pastoralists. And this is where you get the story you already mentioned with Dumuzid and Enkimdu, who is different from Enkidu. Um, I've seen some people mix them up. It's very easy to mix them up. But Enkimdu is kind of Dumuzid for farmers, much less famous because he's much less sexy. Um, and I do mean that quite literally. He is a he's usually called a god just because we don't have the human aspect to him the way that we do with Dumuzid, just because his stories don't survive the same way. But he's very much a god of canals and fertile fields, irrigation canals and fertile fields, and
Sure.
having um, the land for growing grain. And so Dumuzid as the excellent pastoralist and Kimdu as the excellent farmer, they have a story where they are competing to win the heart of Inanna, who is the passionate, lovely lady that everyone would like to win her heart until you win it, and then you realize you're better off not winning it. But the progress of that debate is pretty much the same as the grain versus sheep debate. Um, and if you think there was an extended version of Cain and Abel where they went into more detail about what they were offering up to God, the fruits of the field or the animal sacrifices. If you think there was a greater debate there, which some people have claimed, then it's part of that larger tradition. But Dumuzid wins because he has everything that women want. He specific not just because he personally is great, but he as the pastoralist has everything women want. And this is like he has butter and milk. This is like an economic thing to a large extent. He has animal wealth, which is, at least at this point, more highly thought of than land wealth, at least in the cultural sphere.
That's
Because,
another parallel that's true for the Nordics at this time period as well.
okay,
You see this with the runic script, Fehu, the first rune there with it. It means cattle or movable wealth, quite literally for what's going on there. And on that same front, since we're talking about the her, meaning Inanna, choosing her husband, but Utu's uh, suggestion, I guess you could say, it's more of a pestering, but as in my opinion, um, this is where we use the term animal husbandry
mm-hmm,
today, and this is it's actually a direct connection to Dumuzid becoming husband of Inanna, and of course she's the goddess, and she's the one that has that, and they're going for her divine favor, just like Cain and Abel are going for the divine favor of Yahweh. So there's another parallel on that front as well. So
mm-hmm. Yeah, but it's not just that he has um, the desirable thing. He's got animal wealth, so he's rich. He's got milk and wool, both of which are like domestic comforts.
Yep.
It's comfort
Especially in
food is
Sumerian
milk.
with the
Hmm.
milk, because you can only be there for a certain amount of time, otherwise it spoils.
Yeah, and it's very comforting. Um, Milk and wool. It's soft and warm and pleasant, and these are nice things that ladies want, especially, and this is important, especially young unmarried women lust after Dumuzid. And another part of that is just it's generally thought that in this part of history, the pastoralists were probably physically healthier than most agriculturalists. And I've seen that in a bunch of different ways, a bunch of different places. But the idea is Dumuzid as a pastoralist is just taller, um, buffer than his farm
Counterpart.
than the farmers that he's competing against. And he's got wealth, he's got looks, he's got these comfort gifts that he can give out to the ladies. And so Inanna picks him. Inanna as the stand-in archetype of the unmarried lady. That's why her brother Utu Shamash has to push her to get married, because I mean this when you read the love story of Inanna and Dumuzid, it's so modern because it's very modern. When we
No, it
look
is. And I'm
at
just laughing because I agree.
yeah, when we look at uh, marriage from the perception from the standpoint of what was in the law, what was in the religious rituals, what are in the proper and appropriate customs. From that standpoint, we really get the idea that nearly all marriages in the ancient world were arranged marriages for economic, social reasons, and of course they were. Um, but then you read about Inanna, and there's one poem, probably a song, where Dumuzid comes up to Inanna while they're courting. This is separate from the Enkimdu rivalry. Uh, there's a million songs of just Dumuzid and Inanna courting at various ways. And Dumuzid goes over to Inanna's house, and even though they're gods, in a lot of the poetry, they are very explicitly cast as just people in a regular town or village of ancient Sumer. And so you could just replace it with random young boy goes up to random young girl. But Inanna and Dumuzid become these archetypes there. Anyway, Dumuzid comes up to Inanna or to her house and like whispers over the wall, "Hey, Inanna, come with me. Let's go do things that your parents aren't going to approve of that might result in children." And Inanna's like, "Oh my, I would get in so much trouble if I do that." And Dumuzid's like, "Look, all you got to do is tell your mother that you saw some of your girlfriends out dancing in the street and singing, and you were just out with them for a couple hours dancing in the street, and then they won't suspect anything, and we'll just go off to some shed somewhere and make passionate love." And it's like the boyfriend, the attractive but non socially fitting in boyfriend archetype. He's a little bit older. He's independent. He's got his own means. He's got cool presence. He brings, he smokes cigarettes or
The
whatever.
bad boy
Drives
archetype of
yeah,
today. Yeah.
and he's like, "Hey, let's go lie to your parents and let's go sleep around." It's very modern. It's fantastic. But that's him as that masculine archetype, but a very specific kind of masculine archetype, not a generic man. A it's a young girl's first crush is very much how I've equated it in other places. And I don't know if Balder is like that, but I'd be interested. I'd be interested if Balder's very attractive or not.
Almost all of the Aesir gods are attractive in
Oh
one
well,
form
that's
or
for
another.
sure.
To put it this way, for what's going on, very briefly, there's another hybrid character. I say hybrid because she's was a Jotnar, then became a goddess after she marries one of the gods and that kind of stuff for what it is. Her name is Skadi. And by the way, it's potentially the entirety of Scandinavia, Scandinavia is named after her, which would mean Scotty's Island, which would mean Shadow Island or Harm Island or Injury Island or something like that for what it is, because people used to think it was an island at one point, way back in the ancient
Hmm.
time periods and when scholars are writing some of these maps and stuff down. So this particular being is so important that potentially the entirety of the Scandinavian peoples are named after her. Just to put this into perspective, and that she's the one that represents the land. Anyway, what happens is very briefly, the the gods, her father ends up stealing Idun after Loki causes a bunch of problems for them, and Idun, with her life-giving apples, make it so that way the gods are continuously renewed for youth and all that other stuff. So they're very much important for what it is. Loki eventually gets Idun back and makes it so that way in the process Scotty's father is killed. All right. Now, one of the things that she's there ready to do war with the Asgardians. That's what she's ready to do with this. But they convince her that they don't want to do war, that they don't want any more bloodshed and all of that. They'd rather have a truce, and they would rather give her recompense for what's going on there. All right. And repayment to her. And she hears them out, what they have to say, and an agreement to it, and the conditions were a husband of some sort that was going on. We'll come back to that one in a moment. The other one was to make it so that way uh, you have to do something to make her laugh, and then as an added bonus, which wasn't part of the conditions, they take uh, her father's eyes, put them into the heavens as stars, and so he's immortalized that way forever. That wasn't a part of the arrangement. There's a couple other things, but anyway, so you have to get her to laugh, which as she's like this battle hardened, you know, Jotnar, which is usually translated as giantess. It's not actually accurate. It's its own separate thing, but we'll go with that for the sake of simplicity here. And she, you have Loki who decides to go and get a goat. So this also potentially has to do with some of this pastoral stuff that we're talking about in a roundabout way. And um he ties a rope around it, and he ties the other end around his testicles. And they do this yanking back and forth thing until he falls into Scotty's lap, which eventually makes her laugh. So that condition one has been met. Now, condition two, they agree that she is allowed to choose a husband for herself, but she has to do so only, only by making it so that way she sees the feet of the gods that are there and whatnot. So basically, you can see from like the knee down is basically how it plays out for what it is. And she chooses one. It turns out not to be Balder. But the key point for why I'm bringing this up is that she says that has to be Balder because there's nothing ugly on Balder and whatnot. There's nothing, there's no part in any way, shape, or form. It turns out to be another god named Norder or Nerthus, depending on how it plays out in certain things or what's going on in certain traditions. And when you look at it from that perspective, it is very clear, even in that small story, that like, bro, he is the god of gods in terms of how he looks and all of that. he is literally like what is that he has all this shining light coming from him and all this other stuff. When you look at he just has this like charisma off the charts for what it is for it. He's impervious to everything except mistletoe. Nothing can even harm him. That's how powerful he is. You could take, a nuclear weapon in today's world and have it dropped on his head, and he would just laugh it off like it was nothing, supposedly, if you follow the stories for what's going on there. So, yeah, he
That's
very much
actually
fits the.
that's actually pretty interesting because nearly every god is attractive, of course, and unless they're specifically
Specifically
ugly for
not, yeah,
some
for whatever
reason.
the
Yeah.
story purposes are. Yes.
And nearly every god in at least the Mesopotamian tradition has praise hymns about their strength. It's all about how strong, it talks about how strong they are, because, being strong is just like being good, for
Oh yeah,
them.
yeah.
It's, it's, it's just part of goodness is strength for
But you
them.
need that too
You,
in the Nordic/Germanic peoples as well. 100%.
you
They're a very
have
warrior culture.
you don't have that as much with Dumuzid, interestingly, which is why I think so many people equate him with a human that is just like somehow a human archetype entangled in the divine. Um,
That
and
fits
when you
Balder too.
do,
He's not very strong and all that. Yes, I mentioned he's impervious to things basically,
Mhm.
but he doesn't fit he's not a warrior like the other gods are that are male gods. He doesn't do that. Like in terms of the actual mythology, not in terms of like how video games portray him or whatever else and that
Yeah,
kind of stuff. He's not a fighter. He's not a fighter at all.
that's interesting because so what does happen for a sort of, I don't want to say brief period of time because we're talking like 5 centuries, but in the grand sweep of Mesopotamia, that is kind of a brief time.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. Compared
you
to
have
thousands upon thousands of years, yeah.
you have the rise of the Amorites, which my book, History and Myth from Babylon and the Amorites, covers this exact period, though I don't have this story in there. Um,
Extra
the
content.
Amor Yeah, bonus content. There we go. Uh, the story of Dumuzid. The Amorites are a nomadic pastoralist people. They come in and they sweep away the old Sumerians. They beat them, take over their cities, and they sweep away most of the Akkadian cities to the point that nearly every king, every important king by the 1800s BC is an Amorite for a while. And texts from the old, what we call the old Babylonian period, which is Hammurabi, the great lawmaker. He's an Amorite. And from this period, you start to see Dumuzid actually being praised for his strength, but it's not for his strength specifically. You see him praised as things like commander of the chariots, captain of the hosts,
Mm.
because being a pastoralist for these certain centuries, I mean, being a pastoralist, you're always fighting raids. You're always a raider.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
in these centuries specifically, these pastoral raiders have taken over the world, basically, um, or at least the part of the world they care
That
about.
is that they care about. Yeah, and they
Yeah.
know about. Yeah.
And this is when you see Dumuzid really start to become identified not just with as a pastoralist, but as a king. So Dumuzid in the Sumerian period and the earlier period, he was one guy who had married Inanna. Inanna's had a bunch of boyfriends, a bunch of husbands. She is the community bicycle, and every and Dumuzid
Uh,
is important in that. But Dumuzid's important in that, and he does get identified in the Descent to the Underworld narrative. But the royal kingship idea of Dumuzid doesn't come in until the Sumerian period has ended, wiped out by these Amorites, who seem to sort of self-identify with Dumuzid. And at that point, Dumuzid's marriage to Inanna becomes emblematic for the Amorite king's marriage to sacred marriage to Inanna. They're taking the Inanna royal wedding tradition from the Sumerian kings. The
Right.
Sumerian kings, especially of Uruk, had been marrying Inanna for at least 1,000 years, if
I was gonna
not
say
more.
forever at this point, forever.
Hmm. But they hadn't been doing it as Dumuzid. They had been doing it as the king of Uruk, and
Whoever their
Inanna
particular,
loves
yeah,
Uruk.
right, right.
When the Amorites show up, now they are increasing. It's increasingly the case that the king of the, or the most one of the important kings of the Amorites, when they do marry Inanna, they are doing it more as Dumuzid.
Right, the archetype of Dumuzid,
Hmm.
right.
And so that he becomes a kingly archetype at that point more than he was before. So now he is lover and king, um, and that's when you get the full melding of the sex poetry tradition. And my favorite example, of course, of Inanna and Dumuzid sex poetry is Song of Solomon in the Bible, which is an
Yeah.
Aramaic text from, I want to say, 400 or 300 BC, way after Solomon. But it's Solomon somehow ends up being identified with Dumuzid because, of course, the Israelites, as part of their identity, they retain the we were desert wanderer nomad peoples. Um,
Well, you get the Shepherd
Abraham,
King idea for what's coming out
yeah,
of it.
David the Shepherd King, yeah.
Yeah, you get that for what's happening with it.
Hmm.
And so if you play that, obviously Dumuzid is that. And so there's clearly that's being played out with it. And then you have which would are the precursor to a lot of the Hebrew people and whatnot. You have the Hyksos and their
Hmm.
shepherd kings for what's going on with that. We know that this is the case for it when they go and invade lower, or, excuse me, upper Egypt for what it is, up in the
No,
Delta region.
that is Lower Egypt, yeah,
Oh yeah, yeah,
because it's
lower
it's
Egypt.
backwards from
Yeah,
how
it's
we
back.
would
That's
think
right.
of
It's
it. Yeah.
backwards. Yeah. So
Hmm.
when they go and do that, they make that happen for what's going on there, and so they have that, and that's where some of these people go in there for a while, and the point is that yeah, it makes complete sense that they would do that. I mean, they even have in the Jewish calendar and whatnot the month of Tammuz, which is
Hmm.
just it's literally Dumuzid. It's literally Dumuzid is what it is. So. Yeah, makes sense to me. On that front, if you look at the evolution of the Jewish timeline very briefly here, in order to help put this in further perspective, for what's going on, is that you have probably a mistranslation. I say probably because there's still some debate about this, but it doesn't say like for idols and idolatry and that kind of stuff. It doesn't claim that there's like physical objects or like, Anubis back here on my tapestry or whatever is problematic. No, it actually is in the sense of that. It's saying that they're shit gods, that they're not important gods, as if we would say, oh, that's shit today. That's the absolute bullshit today, or whatever it is. That's how it would actually be with it. So not to follow these other gods. So in other words, it's not saying that these other gods didn't exist. It's saying that they're not worth going after and that you shouldn't worship them. So in the very earliest versions, even inside of what's still left, that's been canonicized inside of the Bible as we know it today, they never claimed originally, if this theory is correct, which is gaining ground on it in terms of the etymological roots of stuff, that other gods didn't exist. And you can see that they even mention the Egyptian gods. They even say that they were real and some of the stuff for what was going on that to help back this theory up. That they didn't exist. It's just that they're not worth worshiping. They're not real true gods, is what it is. And like they're lower level. Forget them. I'm the top god, basically. Worship me, is how this plays out. Now, why am I bringing this up? Well, because David and Solomon, etc., they were still following the ancient traditions that you're talking about with the Song of Songs of having Ashtart be inside of it, or Asherah being inside of their temple for what's going on and being a part of that particular thing with it. And if you trace that back, it goes back to Ishtar, which of course is Inanna, for what's going on there. It's the same thing. And so that's my guess as to why it's like what they did with Marduk and Babylon and replacing
Hmm.
him with the god beforehand that was in there for the creator god Enlil and then that kind of stuff, right? So with the Numa Elish, it's just the same thing. Okay, well, it's the same story. We like the story, but we don't want these characters here anymore. We want these characters and we're placing them there because they're also part of our tradition and they're doing basically the same thing. So might as well. That's my an understanding of it from the very brief form that I can give here. There's obviously a lot more to it, but
Hmm. Yeah, the only thing I'd say is that David seems to have been a Yahweh supremacist. It would have been Solomon bringing the pagan worship back into the temple, though it wouldn't have been very far removed.
no, I mean
Um, yeah.
David was definitely pushing it a lot more, but even he still had the divine feminine goddess in terms of the temple that he was there for. It was the one thing he kept from it and that was left over. And then obviously, like you said, Solomon really brought it back, type deal for what's going on there. So anyway, that's not our main focus and topic. So we'll go back to what we're focusing on. But yeah, it's an interesting parallel for sure.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm not really sure. Um, because yeah, just the evolution of Dumuzid from being the bad boy that all the girls want, to being the
I'm the king.
shepherd king, married to Ishtar, married to Inanna. Um, that is sort of his grand
Progression.
arc. I should probably note some people, if they're into the mythology thing, they may have seen Dumuzid the fisherman, um, and that
Yep.
is or the Dumuzid in the Sumerian kings list. And I will say this actually had confused me for quite a while. The Dumuzid in the Sumerian kings list is almost certainly not meant as a reference to the shepherd god Dumuzid. He is probably someone whose name was Dumuzid, um, from what gets called the Sea Land, which is this swamp that's sort of near the end of the Persian Gulf.
Yep.
Um, and he would have been a fisherman because he's from this sea land.
Right. Yeah, makes sense.
And it seems that he conquered the city of Uruk for a period of time and may have ruled over it for a while until he was defeated and
He's also
Uruk
supposedly
got.
an antediluvian king, if memory serves me correctly, and he's the fifth one of the antediluvian kings on the Sumerian list.
Oh, no, he is after the flood because in the
Right,
list,
anti, not
Dumuzid is.
pre-diluvian, antediluvian.
Oh, yeah. Um, he is after the flood. He is where exactly I don't know, but he fits in the he's clearly at the peak of Uruk's power because he fits in between the great Uruk kings Enmerkar and Lugalbanda, and then you have Gilgamesh, either one or just immediately after that. Um, so he's some nobody from the fisherman lands that seems to have come and conquered Uruk for a little while, and seems to have claimed Inanna as his wife. Um, and then he gets overthrown, and then the rightful order is restored, politically speaking. But that is a separate mythic cycle, and it's interesting because, of course, being a fisherman, he's not a pastoralist. he's not a farmer. He is this sort of third way kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
You'll see, oh, what's the name? I think I
And
have it in
fishing
my
goes
notes
back
here.
further than
Gudam.
any of these things with it. We know we have found fishing hooks that go back at least 70,000 years ago.
Oh,
It might
yeah.
even be further inside of that in terms of archaeological evidence. I'm not sure. I haven't looked into that specific one in a while. But the point is, fishing has been done very long time. And if you're going with the three identities here, it is by far the oldest of them.
Oh, yeah. His name is also Gudam, Gudam, and I remember I don't remember if it's Rosicrucian or one of those related esoteric things. They have something about Gudam as like an esoteric fisherman mystic sort of thing. So he may have had his own esoteric tradition at some point, but it's not related to this Dumuzid. I only vaguely remember it because I haven't done that stuff in quite a while.
I get
Uh,
you.
yeah, but uh, but yeah. So Dumuzid, pastoral uh, archetype god, and he's every woman's dream. He makes your flocks wealthy, or he makes your flocks increase, which is wealth. He's got cosmic roles just through his divine kingship and also through his tie in to the underworld story. Um, and I guess he's got a sister, and the sister is quite the character all to herself because the sister is really kind of sad. Uh, there's there's a praise poem to the lovers Ishtar and Dumuzid, and it briefly mentions. Oh, I gotta find it. Let me. It briefly mentions that Inanna just has a real hard time of it all the time. Oh, her eyes were lacerated. She lacerated her mouth. She lacerated her place not spoken of to men, and she just cut herself all the way up. Then she went to the palace tavern, and she was looking everywhere for Dumuzid. She couldn't find Dumuzid. She was so distraught because she couldn't find her brother, but she was just cutting herself all over the place. And then she like walks around town like this ghoulish cut up figure in mourning clothes, bleeding out everywhere. And she's just asking everybody, do you know where my brother is? And then in the meantime, it seems that her brother Dumuzid is, oh, just with Inanna party, and his sister is just distraught out of her mind. And that's like, I don't actually know how to make sense of it, to be completely honest, but it's a very striking image.
I have an idea of what might be going on there, but in order to put it into context, we also need to be looking a little further on with things, which is actually when Dumuzid has been taken into the underworld as a replacement for stuff. Do you remember when I was talking about how I was saying Geshtinana, Bellali, and Inanna were playing the role of the
Mm,
tripartite goddess type thing? I
mm,
am absolutely certain that that is what's going on there now after reviewing this information that I haven't in years, like I talked about, to talk about this again here today with you. And if you go and you look at it, that three part is showing up again. You have Geshtinana, you have Inanna herself, and then you have his mother showing up. And they're playing all three roles, again, lamenting him while he's in the underworld and that kind of stuff. So if all three of them are actually the same being in some fashion or another in terms of playing the ultimate goddess, let's say, and they're all just like parts of that notion because of the maiden the wife slash mother, and then the crone, old crone, an old woman type thing with it, and they're all just aspects of a much bigger archetype of the overall goddess figure for what's going on there. Then you put that into perspective for what's happening. This would also explain a lot of other parts of this mythology that's going on there. If you have it to where, as I have said before, Gestanana actually represents Inanna in her maiden form before she gets married and that kind of thing for what it is, then it would also be that she's looking for her brother. If you go back to Utu slash Shamash, that's there with it, it's heavily implied in the very beginning of stuff with it that he wanted to marry Inanna himself for what's going on there, realizing that that's not going to work the way he wants with it. Then he goes into the story of the other two that we've talked about already, the pastoral versus the farmer idea, and trying to get her to choose between one of them and whatnot. Now, the reason why I'm bringing that up is because, they're Utu slash Shamash is the brother of Inanna. And if you play this same concept out, you have Dumuzid being the brother of Geshtinana. So it's almost as if they're trying to tell you that this is the same idea that's being played out in another way that's going on there for the maiden concept. So her lamenting and wondering where is her brother at and that kind of stuff. It's not just because it's her brother, it's also her lover. And her being upset that he's gone with Inanna, the other variant of her, that's still the same archetype that we're talking about here, makes it so that way it actually answers that question to a certain extent. It would also make it so that way it becomes very clear on the fertility aspects for what's happening there, meaning the story that has to do with obviously Dumuzid is only there for 6 months out of the year and the other 6 months are with Geshtinana, that in a way it's still Inanna in the underworld that's going there for that. And we also know that Gestanana is somebody who is a scribe in the underworld that's happening there and does certain aspects that are going on that. So there's the aspect of her going in there for her own purposes that she needs to be with it. So when Inanna comes to the gates and her sister, the queen of the underworld, excuse me, Ereshkigal is there wondering, why the hell are you here, basically. Could it also be because she was in another variant of herself, the scribe, that was supposed to be there to take care of something? Oh no, I'm not here for that. I'm here for these other purposes. Uh-huh, right. I don't believe you. Something's wrong for what's going on here. And it could also lead to the fact of her wanting to take the throne for herself on top of it, because it's a different aspect of Inanna that's wanting to go and do that particular um, front that's going on with it. I'm not saying you have to agree with it. I'm just saying I have a possible explanation that goes along with that. Interestingly enough, if you go back to the Nordic tradition and that kind of thing with it, if you go and play this, it's these same themes are played out with another couple that are very, very likely the exact same beings as that on a different form for what it is. So you have Balder and Inanna, which would be in this variant, Dimuzid and Inanna. And then in a higher level, you have another couple that's Freyr and Freya and that kind of stuff. Now, Freya is very interesting because she's also associated with Venus just like Inanna is. And she's also associated with other things just like Inanna is. And her name literally means the lady. Okay, the Lady of Heaven, the Queen of Heaven type idea that's going on there. You have Freyr, which means the Lord, and their brother and sister. In fact, that they're twins in this instance for what's happening. And Freyr wants to marry another variant of Freya named Gerder, which is it's obvious that it's her. It's not even like no most scholars don't debate this for what's going on there. And so it seems like it's playing out in another roundabout way and gives even more potentiality for the fact that these ancient themes came for the Nordic tradition came from ancient Mesopotamia, through thousands of years of travel, and then got morphed because you can't make it so that way. Well, summer is bad when it's actually the good one for the Nordics. You have to change certain elements just to the environment and whatnot, but the same core themes are there. Is this actually true or not? I don't know. That's not something I can answer here in this question. I just know I have a potential aspect for what's going on, and I'm 100% the tripartite goddess. I'm convinced of that is true of these characters and whatnot playing out. I'm not saying that it is exactly the same thing. I would need to investigate this angle further to say one way or another, but this is the first thing that popped off my head based upon what remembering of what I remember of it, what you're telling me, as well as what I did in the last couple weeks here since we last met up. So,
See, I still think that's interesting, but it seems really bleak if I have to be completely honest, because Anna is just the most miserable figure in Mesopotamian mythology. There's one story where so Dumuzid and Inanna are married and they're living on a ranch. And because that's what you do apparently. And and because they're living on a ranch, they've got their extended family there. So
right.
Anna is also living in the house with them, and that's normal enough as it is. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
and
that's pretty normal
and
for that time period.
yeah,
Yeah.
and Anna is always portrayed as very doting on Dumuzid. She's very motherly in a sense, very considerate and helpful, and just a great sister, all in all. And so Dumuzid gets up from being with Inanna and says, "Oh, I'm going to go out and just get some desert air, some nice desert air." And he invites Anna out with him. And they go to the barn and they do some other stuff. And then they go to the barn where all their sheep are. And Dumuzid says, "Look at that little baby lamb. What is it doing to its mother?" And I assume this is divine power. He's making this happen or something. I don't really know um, what all is going on, but the baby sheep is mounting its mother, and in a very pornographic way. And Dumuzid keeps poking it at Anna and says, "What's that sheep doing to its mother? What's it doing?" And she's like, "Well, I guess he's just, copulating with his own mother." Um, but she doesn't quite get it. And then at the end of the tablet, which thankfully is damaged and we can't really read what's going on, he is then like, "Hey, if that lamb is mounting its own mother, I should be mounting my own sister." And then he violates her violently in the shed. And this is the brother that she is going to endure
Torture,
extreme
various different
torture.
types of tortures for it. Yeah.
Yes. And she is constantly suffering for her brother. And I that's the part that I don't, because it's so she suffers when she lives with him. She suffers when he's not there, and she continually harms herself when he's not there, because she's looking for him and she's just cutting herself out of grief. And then when he's being taken by the demons to be taken down to the underworld, she is tortured round after round, never says a word,
All right.
perfectly loyal,
So this
never
also adds
thinks
another
about leaving
layer to
him.
what I was talking about for the explanation, but you have to get to another point for it. Obviously, we have no idea, truthfully, what order these stories go in. Okay? I'm letting the audience know this ahead of time. We don't know. There's been theories, there's been speculation on it. Some of it is pretty concrete, some of it's like very much just guesswork and hypothesis and whatnot. We don't know 100% for what's going on here. So for the sake of my particular theory that I'm putting forward, which I don't see anybody else doing. I'm not saying nobody else has. I just haven't read this from any
Mm-hmm.
scholarly stuff for what's been going on there myself. So here's what I see on this front. If you go with Gestanana is the maiden, the younger version of Inanna. Then you have Inanna because she's getting married, so you're no longer going to be a maiden here for what's going on, which is why I've chosen her. Technically, I guess you could flip it around. The only one that's not true is Bleckley and, of course, uh, the mother figure that are literally Dumuzid's mother. Those are the old crones, okay? They're the older ones. They've already done it. We already know that. That's not arguable in the tripartite part for what I'm bringing up here for this, okay? But I put Gestanana as the younger version. It even fits with her being younger than Dumuzid to begin with, and other things that we've talked about here for what it is. We also have where Enki is giving all of the various me's out to the various different gods and goddesses and that kind of stuff to do with that. And Inanna doesn't have any. And she goes to him and says, "Well, what the heck? I didn't get any." And he says, "You don't need any. You already have it." As if he already knows what her destiny is supposed to become and all of that to begin with, which is quite clear. I mean, that's nothing. Inky knows destinies of so many other things. That doesn't mean shit. That's like, okay, great. That's pretty obvious that he could know something like that. Fine. I don't need to give you one. You already have one. Trust me, dear. You don't need to worry about this. So if you take this same concept for what's going on, you have to where it's actually her role as the beginning portion where she is supposed to be in that state all of the time. And this is what sets off Inanna trying to go and take back power for herself. To make it so where she's no longer Gestanana, she's just Inanna that's going on with it. And this sends her off to go conquer and do all these other things and get all this power and all these other things that are going along with that. And so when you come to the point again where at the end of it, she's conquered all these different places. She's gotten all these me's underneath her that she has control over and whatnot. And now she's going unto the underworld to go conquer everything. She's conquered Earth. She's conquered heaven. There's only one realm left that needs to be taken over for her and whatnot, and to sit on the throne that Ereshkigal holds. And if she does that, she's done everything. She is the penultimate goddess and god that exists inside the Sumerian pantheon. No one can say anything because she has all three realms, right? Out of the three major realms that there are. So that's what she goes and tries to do, supposedly in this variant of the understanding of the story. And then while she does that, she obviously fails. She knows she's going to die down there. That's why she sets it up ahead of time. But she's going to do something that nobody else has done. She's going to conquer death itself by coming back through the help of Enki and whatever else the stuff goes with. But she's going to do that for what's going on there. Now, what happens in this particular point of it is you have where all of these other people that the Gala demons come up with, and they they go to Ninshibur, they go to these other ones that are all of her son and another priest and all that other stuff that's going on with it. She all tells them to go away. Why? Because they're all doing the proper thing of following the divine order and doing what needs to be done, the lamentations, all that other stuff with it. But her husband isn't. Her husband, at least in one version of the story, is sitting on her throne with slave girls that are entertaining him. Okay? This is the final straw for Gestanana in this particular instance for what's going on, because now she's become Inanna. She's no longer doing any of that stuff beforehand in order to try to claim power for herself. She's done with it. You have betrayed me for the final time. You've caused me this pain for the final time. I'm done with it. You didn't follow me in the divine order of things. You have tried to usurp my power for what's going on here. I'm completely done with your bullshit. You're going to the underworld. That's what's happening there with it. I don't want to play this game anymore. I'm tired of it for what's happening. Now you might be thinking, well, why does Gestanana then go and do all this stuff to try to prevent him from happening and going in there and just suffering all the torture and all that other stuff that goes along with that? Again, it's because it's three different parts of the goddess all at the same time that are going there with it to kind of explain it. It's not just one. It's like you have to look at three different characters here that are all playing it, that are making that happen. So her role in that story is to show the suffering, the abuse, and all these other things with it in order to make it show the next variant of her that doesn't allow that to happen, that doesn't want any part of it in any way, shape, or form, that doesn't want to make it so that way she's at, and she becomes this all-powerful deity, as at least as powerful as she can get for herself and that kind of stuff, that's going and creating her own destiny. It's the exact foil to the other one that's going on that front for what's happening there. This is my personal interpretation of things with it. We also see, going back to like the earth goddess concept, that's there, like the, you know, and the divine priesthood and all that other stuff, that's happening, with it, and the lowering of the rights down from heaven to men, and that kind of stuff. You also see this part play out for what it is. They're now reliant upon her, meaning Inanna, for their powers and that kind of stuff. So it's a complete reversal of things with it, the taking away of patriarchal power and that kind of thing with it, and then the patriarchy trying to take it back through Dumuzid and that kind of stuff, and then ultimately failing at least at that stage for that, and then her coming back into her own power, and then going and sharing that power and trying to have balance at the end of it, to where Gustinana is in the underworld for half the year. He is in the underworld for half the year. They both get to be above and not in the underworld and that kind of stuff, and be in control of it, and to try to share and come back and make it so that way that's the case for it. She feels guilty, from that one of her aspects of herself with it. She doesn't just want to do that. Her more wiser self, the crone at the end, and all that other stuff, also wants to make it so that way he's brought back, in order to make it so that way they can reestablish a proper, balanced order of things where everything is fair for both sides for what's going on with it. This also, of course, this also doesn't touch upon, like the cycles of the seasons and all that, but that's all part of it for the balance side of things with it too. I'm just looking at it through this one particular lens right now, just to be clear for what's going on. And so this is my current, I'm not saying it can't change with new evidence that pops up or my studying more things with it, but my current understanding of this situation that's going on here, and why it's being done, this particular way. Doesn't mean I'm right. Absolutely not. Doesn't mean that. But it is an explanation that actually does explain this variant, which I haven't seen anybody else explain it. So,
Yeah, no, there's something psychologically valuable there. It's sort of a template, because especially when you see Dumuzid as an archetype, and Dumuzid's relations with women as templates for not necessarily the best relationships always, but in fact, it might be that all of his relationships are disordered in a sense, because he's very often courting Inanna inappropriately or excessively. He is often taking marital rights before the marriage has happened. Though there is a time where they are married for a while. There is happy love poetry with Dumuzid. But when you look at Inanna, she is, I mean, you have to know that there was male on female abuse in families in the ancient times, and especially if you do identify her partly with Inanna, and have sort of a fluid identification there, um, then you have the sense of, hey, yes, there are women who are being traumatized by the men in their lives in a variety of ways. In Inanna being usurped after her death, in Inanna being in having her death celebrated, or in Inanna's many sacrifices and direct abuses. But then the resolution, where yes, you really want Dumuzid dragged down by a bunch of demons, but at the same time, Inanna is also defending him to the last. Um, but then in the end, you do find resolution in a cycle that's not really that great. Spend half the year in the underworld in order to have half the year of normal life. it's not a great resolution, but I think especially with the stuff you were talking about, there's possibly in that an archetype for ancient women to find resolution to various traumas. Uh, I don't know. That's just what I was thinking while you were talking. So now
Well, the
I'm
other part of it is, if look
coming
who
up
is the
with
one that
that.
says it's Inanna that dictates, hey, this is the new, this is what I decree. You will be there for half the
Hmm.
year, and you will be there for the other half of the year for what's going on. It's like the older version of herself that's become slightly more wise, slightly more thing with the telling Dumuzid, this is our relationship now. This is the other one. It's a balanced one. We are no longer going to be doing the old way of
Hmm.
things or what's happening. So in that
Yeah.
instance, if you played it as the character as different variants of it in time as well, it actually adds to what you're bringing up right now
Yeah.
too. So
Yeah. And for the woman in this to have um, dictating authority, whether as a queen or as a wife, that's something you just don't see anywhere else in Mesopotamia. Well, I don't want to say anywhere else, but very rarely in Mesopotamian literature at all. It's very patriarchal, but Dumuzid is such uh, a problem for the ladies around him that I guess it becomes culturally acceptable at a certain point for the woman to say, to be through this myth, to be allowed to say, hey,
enough is
no,
enough.
I'm not taking that anymore.
Right. Right.
And that's
And I
also
don't
a
know if
very
it's true or
modern
not. I
thing.
don't know if
Yeah.
that's actually how they viewed it or
Hmm.
not. Because the problem is we're looking at from something that was probably much older originally in terms of, say, oral tradition before it got written down. And we're talking about something that happened over thousands of years of storytelling. And I'm someone is looking at it from my own modern sensibilities and my own understanding of things that are going on. And I don't have the full picture of what these people believed in terms of their religion, in terms of their politics, and all that other stuff that's going on there, their day-to-day lives, and all that other stuff. Do I have some inkling of what's going on? Yeah, because I've studied this stuff. I've studied other cultures that are similar, time periods, and all that other stuff with it. And so, it could be completely fabricated theory that's just based upon my own understanding of archetypes in general and wanting a better resolution for stuff for it. But as I also see it, there is nothing that I'm bringing up that, at least in the literary sources, the actual that with it, I'm not talking necessarily some other aspects of archaeological findings or whatever, but just that has a logical internal consistency that's going on there that doesn't detract or take away from any of the other parts of the story in any way, shape, or form, and just it gives a full fleshing out of a variant of a theory that's going on there. To put this in another perspective for what's going on, I'm sure you're at least somewhat familiar. I mean, tangentially, maybe it's not your main stuff with it, like with Homa and Soma and the Greek god Dionysus being associated with wine for his stuff with it, and like mead and other things that are like that are playing with it, was something with the underworld, and then if people who drink that, they gain some sort of resurrection or spiritual illumination or something along those lines with it. Well, Geshti Nana, literally, she's associated with wine. She's the grape. She's the vine of the grapes that are there for what's going on with it. So that's another parallel to, okay, who is the one that goes and conquers death? And the stories, it's Inanna that does. If that is still the same personage, just in a different same person, but with a different personality, a different archetype that's playing out there with it, it's her before she ferments and becomes the wine that she's supposed to be for what's going on that front with it, and making it so that way she can resurrect and do all these other things that are going on there, which would also fit, like I said before, with Enki saying you don't need it. You've already been given your domain. You will be the one who conquers death. You will be the one who does all these other things that nobody else can touch upon for what's going on when he's not handing out the meas to her, because like you don't need it. You don't need it for what's happening. This would also explain um, both on a political level as well as this archetypal level that we're talking about here, why she gets him drunk, meaning Enki, with it, and then steals all the Mies and gets all the powers from what's going on with it. He wants them back originally, but then agrees to just let her have it for what's happening because he realizes is later on that like, hey, you know, she's fulfilling her destiny now the way she's supposed to be that I had foresaw whenever it was that he foresaw it in terms of the stories and that kind of thing with it. I'm just going to let it go. I'm going to let it be type deal for what's going on that front. And then, of course, you get intoxication that comes from this that we were talking about earlier with the divine ecstasy, the divine frenzy that we're talking about. Drunk and being drunk and drinking like you would with wine and that kind of stuff puts you into that altered state of consciousness again, which is another metaphor for this type of stuff that I've brought up earlier and whatnot. And so it all just kind of ties together and on this particular front again. Again, is it true? I don't know. I'm not trying to pretend that I do on this. Again, it just fits with all the data points that I have that I can see on this front for what's playing out there for this. And therefore, I view it as at least a valid hypothesis. I'm not saying it's factual. I'm saying it's a valid hypothesis in my mind, though. And if you go with Enki being the patriarch and the one that controls all of the Mies, which are basically just various different powers that each of the gods have in some form or another that they're associated with, and he's kind of the one that gives them out. That would be the patriarchal figure again, the father figure, the male being in charge of things with it, and then Inanna having to trick in some form or another, using, getting him drunk and that kind of stuff, and then taking the Mies away from him. It's another way of showcasing that she's coming into her own power and that women have another way out of this if they are able to make that occur and make it happen. And it's another showcasing of the potentiality for that you had brought up yourself or what you heard from when I was talking. So anyway, I won't ramble on. I'll get your thoughts at this stage.
I think there's a lot there. I think I think what we have is something of a modern interpretation, but I also don't think that makes it wrong because we've got a psychological and we've got a archetypal view going on. And I think that both can be affecting the oral tradition, even without someone sitting down and saying, hey, let's write something that is archetypally relevant to the Vikings, uh, or whatever, or let's write something that is a reflection of the trauma that I feel from losing my husband or whatever. Um, I think it might still be there. Um,
I have a question for you before we go any
yeah,
further. It just really popped into my head that was
yeah.
really important. I don't know if there's a case for this or not. Do we know if there are any surviving like manuals on poetry for like their rules that they had?
Oh, how to write poetry?
Yeah.
No, almost it's a shame because almost all the methodology was strictly oral. And
Okay.
they write down findings and things like
Do you
that.
know who Snorri Sturluson is?
Snorri Sturluson. No,
It's okay.
I assume
It's a
he's a
Nordic.
Viking.
He's a 1200s, well 11 late 1100s early 1200s writer, Icelandic writer and chieftain
Oh,
of
he's
sort.
the Edda, the poetic Edda,
The
yeah?
prose edda, yeah,
Okay, the
yeah.
prose
Poetic
Edda.
edda is
There
its
we
own
go.
separate thing for what's going on with it. Now, the reason why I bring it up is because he himself this is again for the Nordic lens here specifically, but if we're using this as a okay, this could also be translated to other ones, which I know for a fact it can. I'm not saying it is for specifically Sumeria, but it can be translated to other ones that we've seen. That's not even a question. We know that that's the case for it. He explicitly states that in the rules of poetry, and the reason why he, at least according to him, for why he was writing this, is because even though that people were forgetting their own history, they're forgetting their own poetry, they're forgetting their own understanding of things, the youth had forgotten how to interpret it and what was going on there. So he was writing a manual of, not only did it have certain poems of the deities in it, the Nordic pantheon, but also like the explanations as to what was going on at the very end of it, called the Skald Skapar Mal. Um, he was writing it. That's what he claims for why he was doing it. Whether that's true or not, you can leave that up for your own debate. I don't care. I'm just talking about for why he claims that he was writing this particular thing with it. In it, though, he says you can replace a god or goddess with any other god or goddess, and you can know it by their attributes, their me's, their powers, and whatnot. So if I say Tyr's hammer and whatnot, we know the hammer is associated with Thor and that it's not Tyr. But you might use Tyr as the replacement for that particular deity in order to match all the rhyming schemes and the meters and all that other stuff that need to be there for what's going on. Because the whole point of oral tradition, in terms of the rules for it, is to make it so that way it's easy to remember because you're having to remember all these different things with it. And in fact, someone that's a very good skald, a bard, if you will, and whatnot, they can memorize in the Mahabharata, okay, in terms of its
Mhm.
length and whatnot, which would be literally this freaking big if it were translated over their lifetime. And it's massive. It's thousands upon thousands of pages long. They have to remember line after line after line. It takes years and years to get to that point, of course, but that's what they would do with it as the memory keepers of the lore and whatnot. So the reason why I was asking about the poetry thing is if there was, then we could use that as a definitive yes or no for some of these ideas that I had put forth for what's going on there. Um, because it's quite clear, even with Snorri, that he takes Odin as an example for what's going on, and Odin is explicitly by him broken up into three different parts of himself:
Hmm.
high, just as high, and most high is what it is in one of his particular examples for what's happening. So the tripartite god in terms of what's going on there. Well, the tripartite goddess theme that I've been trying to bring up and kind of explore here, if we could find that that is the case for it, then yeah, if we see that that's been proven in poetry, then my theory becomes much more plausible. I'm not saying it is the case, but it's like, okay, now we have backing up for that. Hence why I was asking on that particular front for things with it. And of course, one thing we do know is that um, very clear that that Snorri makes very clear is that um, the way that the rules are, you have to make things in metaphors. You have to make it so there's multiple layers of meaning for what's going on with it, and that you can't just like, let's say I'm a Viking who's also a skald who had some ships that came over to attack us and whatnot. I can't just say the ships came and attacked us because it's not poetry for what's going on there. I have to use a ferocious thing that gives the dread of it. Okay, so the sea wolves. Well, sea wolves is still a little too like ships that are coming over that what's another name for the sea? So I would use Aegir's wolf. He's one of the gods that's in charge of the sea for what's going on with it. All right, wolves a little too thing with that. How would I do with that? Aegir's Fenrir, let's say. Fenrir is the main wolf that kills Odin and Ragnarok and that kind of thing. It's still a little too, doesn't fit with the rhyme or meter that I'm going for. So you keep changing and keep changing and keep changing it when you're writing it to eventually, if you don't know the rules of poetry and you don't know like the landscape that everybody else is used to in terms of how they think, in terms of their religion, in terms of that with it, you're not going to understand it. It gets so lost. And without Snorri and his this surviving thing, we wouldn't understand shit today about the Nordic. We'd be back in the 1800s still in terms of our understanding of stuff with this. It's not exaggeration. Besides maybe some archaeological findings, but in terms of like the history and the poetry, we wouldn't know shit without him. And quite frankly, and so why I'm bringing this up again is because I know it's translatable to other Germanic peoples and that kind of thing, 100%. I also know it's, you know, translatable to other Indo-European groups. It's the same concept that's there for what's going on. You can see this with the Greeks. You can see this with the various different Celtic peoples that are going on. They're just as brief examples. You can see this with um, with the Indus Valley civilization and the Vedic traditions and all of that. But these people, the Indo-Europeans, are separate from the Sumerian ones, and the Sumerians weren't part of it. So I don't know if that same general concept, I'm not saying the exact same rules for all of them because they don't have all the same rules. We're talking thousands upon thousands of years, but the same general trends can be applied to Sumeria. And if they can, well, then definitely have another, um, another way of looking at things that can really truly deep dive this for us. That's why I was wondering if there was any such thing that we knew, even if it's not like theirs. Maybe there's a Babylonian version that was in like the library of Anvershapal or whatever, however you pronounce it, and that kind of stuff that survived that they claim came from. Okay, maybe it's not 100% accurate, but we know some parts of it are definitely going to be
Mhm.
accurate. So you get where I'm coming from. So,
Yeah. Now they gave us very little methodology, intellectual methodology. They clearly had
oh yeah,
intellectual
yeah.
methodology, but it seems to have either not survived or more likely been purely oral.
That'd be my guess is the second one,
Hmm.
the oral tradition for what it is. Yeah, I don't know, but
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's there's a lot there, that's for sure. I don't know. I'm looking through,
and
making
again, this might
sure.
be my own bias of pulling from so many different sources that I'm using
Hmm.
techniques that you can use in one field that don't necessarily apply to this field. You get where I'm coming
Yeah, I
from?
mean
So
it is Semitic poetry, which has its own and I mean the Sumerians are not Semitic, obviously, but
right,
the Akkadians and Amorites that most of it filters
survived
through
from.
is
Yeah,
Semitic. Yeah. Um, and then the Sumerians
and of
are
course
their own thing.
the Semitic peoples did end up having where the Indo-Europeans did come and influence them at some point. We know that. So we do know that at least, say, a couple steps removed from Sumerian stuff that's come down from us,
Hmm.
it is possible that some of those archetypes and some of the stuff we're talking about is completely there, which is why I ran with thinking it's not impossible. It's not impossible. If it's
Yeah,
impossible,
if
I wouldn't
I would
even go
say,
that
yeah,
thought.
yeah, the Indo-Europeans come in um, end of the Middle Bronze Age, basically.
Yep.
Um,
For those of
and
Can you give a time period for people who aren't familiar with
that
that
oh,
or might be?
you're looking at about 1600 BC,
Okay,
um,
yep.
plus or minus a couple centuries.
I
So
couldn't remember exactly. I was putting it around 4,000-ish years ago to 3,800 years ago. So yeah,
it's and by then a lot of the archetypes in the broader Mesopotamian mythos have solidified, but that doesn't mean they don't share archetypes either because of some deeper underlying, more universal human
human
tradition,
can experience. Yep.
or yeah, or just because humans write the same kind of stories all over the place. Both of those are options. Aliens are, of course, always the third option. Uh,
I
but
mean, look, I'm 100% convinced that there's other intelligent life forms out there in the universe. All right, it's just astronomically improbable we're the only ones. Okay, it's just like that's not a
oh,
thing.
for sure. I just don't
The
think they
only
built the
question is whether
pyramids.
they came here and did anything that and like influenced our society or not. That's the only real question for what's going on there in my mind, for what's
Hmm.
happening. And if they're still visiting us today, let's say, that type of deal for what it is. For all we know, we're just a fun experiment for them to see how their own civilizations came and arose and that kind of thing. Or we're the insane asylum of the galaxy that everybody comes and checks out because they're all well past where we're at and they don't have a lot of these wars and problems that we still have. And they're just like, well, when are they going to figure it out? When are they going to figure it out? Like we're a giant Truman show for them or something. I don't know.
I'll bet they're taking bets on all of our wars, probably. How much are the Assyrians going to expand? I'll bet you 50 global credits. I don't know.
I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't know. I
Yeah,
do know
no,
that there are
it goes.
certain mythologies that are very, very clear that yes, there were these alien beings that came here, extraterrestrial, we'll say, Does
Mhm.
that make them physical beings, though? Because extraterrestrial, in my usage, could also mean from another realm or dimension. And so
Yeah.
they could have been contacting spiritual entities and whatnot. That's the other part of it for what's happening here.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of depth there. And
I mean, it's not the main
I say
focus,
we
but it's
don't, yeah.
fun to think about a little bit.
Yeah, I say we don't have any methodology from the Mesopotamians, but like I talked about last time, the one methodology that we do get from them in their commentary traditions is so esoteric and so alien to how we think of things that it just baffles, as far as I could tell, everyone who studies it, where they chop the word up
Like I was
into,
doing with
yeah,
Guest Inanna. Yeah.
like into these etymologies, but it's not just etymologies, it's not straightforward. I mean, there is a straightforward layer of these etymologies, but then it gets super esoteric, and it's like, what's going on?
And
And
you
so,
forward me the information regarding that, or it doesn't have to be like like the actual like PDFs or whatever, but like where I can grab
oh
that so I can.
yeah, I think I might even have that. It's there's a cuneiform commentaries project put through by Yale,
Because this
and
would be something that could help either prove or disprove my current thoughts. You get where I'm coming from if I could
um,
deeply study it.
oh yeah, and I haven't actually looked at it in because they're I assume they're continually, well, I say they're
Updating it.
continually updating it, but it looks like they might not have updated it in a couple of years. But I'll send it to you. I'll put it down in the description box for anybody else who is interested in cuneiform commentaries, because they do get uh, interesting, to say
Do
the
I need to
least.
know cuneiform at all in order to understand it, or do they put it in modern English for us?
At least some of it is translated. How much is translated, I
Okay,
don't
fair enough.
even
No, that's
remember.
fine.
But
That's fine.
yes.
At least as some of it is, I can go in and look at the material that's available there and be like, okay, is this still a possibility? And if I see that there's connections there that I've seen with other traditions that I'm aware of, and be like, yeah, this is still a possibility, then I can keep running with the theory. If not, it's like, nah, I'm completely wrong. I'm insane person. Let's move on. Well, it's like what I talked about before with the Gesta Nana thing, where it was like you got Inanna, and obviously that's very simple. It's still the other character with the you got Gest, which means ear, and if you take the symbol from it and whatnot, the symbolic understanding, it means wise. So therefore, you got wise Inanna for what's happening there. Maybe there's more to it. I'm just talking about the simplicity that I remember off the top of my head for that and that kind of thing. So if you do all that, okay, great. You already know that there's some connection there for what it is. What's true, what's not, that's a different story for what's going on with it. Again, this is not necessarily how the Sumerians would have done it, but this is definitely how the Babylonians would have done it, and the
Hmm,
Akkadians and stuff like that from that time period, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
possibly. But
I
like
mean,
I
like how they
said,
would have broken it down, the cuneiform part. Not necessarily that
mhm,
that's correct, but that's how they would have done it,
yeah,
right?
yeah, I mean, that's,
Thank you.
yes. It's sort of like, if we had one history textbook from nowadays, and it's just a Marxist history textbook. And then 1,000 years from, like if 1,000 years from now, archaeologists are looking, how did people nowadays do history? And all they have is one Marxist history textbook from communist China. And they're like, oh, the methodology was to
Whatever. Yeah.
assume this grand system that predicted all of everything. And it's like, well, that was a methodology in use in our time, but
But it's not the
there's
only
all
one.
the other ones.
Right.
there's this whole that's the hard thing with making too many
I'm not
generalizations
trying to say it's
with
a generalization. I just want to make
Mesopotamian
sure that
stuff.
I'm
Yeah.
not so off kilter that it isn't even a methodology for that time period. Does that make
No, it
sense?
is. Yeah, definitely.
All right. So
Um,
my theory can stand at least for the subset of people minimum.
yeah. Yeah, it's at least one way of thinking about stuff. And there's just, yeah, there's a lot going on there. Probably take more
So we'll
than
say,
either of
at
us
least
have.
from the esoteric group of people, the more mystery school oriented tradition group of people, for what it is, what I'm saying is definitely a plausible explanation. A plausible
It's
explanation.
definitely possible. Yeah. I think we've done more on Dumuzid than most people ever bother to.
I would agree on that, at least from what I've seen. Um,
Yeah, I think I've gone
and to me,
through.
I feel like you and I are just kind of scratching, I wouldn't say the surface, but like just below the surface and whatnot, that there's so much more that could be talked about here. If you look at it from like the iceberg perspective, most people take the top
Mhm.
5, 10%. I feel like we've gotten to maybe like 20, 25% or something like that. And there's still all these other little details and elements that we're like nowhere near touching and that kind of stuff because
Yeah,
we're not devoting our lives to this one specific topic like some people do. So,
yeah, yeah. No, I feel like to get deeper into Dumuzid, you would need to look at magic and ritual, which is not ever something that I've really specialized in. And I don't know how much Dumuzid ritual there is. I'm not an expert on it, but I can't remember seeing too much Dumuzid magic in the various things I've read. But I would
what's
say that
interesting is
would be
that,
the
oh, I'm
getting
sorry. Oh, go
deeper
ahead.
would
Go
be
ahead.
that. Yeah, I would say getting deeper would be looking at Dumuzid as it relates to practice.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
this is at the mythic and archetypal level, and praxis would get you further, and then it would reinforce your mythic and archetypal understanding,
Or
and then
dismantle
it would, yeah,
it.
um, and then that would feed on itself. I don't think it would dismantle too much of what we have, but uh, that's how you would go further. And I'm not equipped to go further because I'm not going to sit there and read magic because it's boring.
Hey, man, depends on the magical system. That's all I'm going to
That's
say.
for sure. Mesopotamian magic. Mesopotamian magic has the magic power to put me to sleep.
No, what on that notion of things in terms of the magical system idea and whatnot. It's quite clear that there are certain traditions that are like, whoa, that's fascinating and that kind of thing. How does that work? And
Hmm.
regardless whether you believe in it or not, it's just like, huh, that's really cool. Um, on that front though, there were pockets that have been reported surviving in Iraq of the Dumuzid cult up until the
Oh yeah.
1800s. So it might actually be very possible to reverse engineer that a lot more than, say, some other traditions that didn't survive past a certain point at all. We also know that in general it survived up until the 1100s and that kind of thing in large swaths. So in this instance, there's a lot more written from other traditions too that could be a glimpse that could give us all the way back down into that system much more so than say other ones where it's like, yeah, we don't have a chance of actually redoing this. We just don't. It's all
Hmm.
more or less speculation for what's going on. It's not like a living tradition, say like Shintoism or
Yeah.
Hinduism or something like that, where it's like, okay, maybe it's changed somewhat over thousands of years, but there's enough here that we can go and figure out what has changed, from the texts that are left and whatnot. Um, so I'm not saying I'm going to do that. That's not um, something I intend to do. I'm not saying I won't do it either. but it is something that's at least plausible to do. It's not impossible.
Hmm.
Like some of the other
Yeah.
stuff is like, yeah, let's bring back a resurrected tradition that's been gone for thousands of years that we know next to nothing about. Say like a mystery school tradition. Now, some of them you can't. There's lots of evidence for them on the archaeological level and even some written, but other ones just like there's nothing. There's literally nothing. Like the Orphics as an example. There's way more on them because of the Orphic hymns than say on some other ones that wrote down literally nothing, and all we have is archaeological stuff, and makes it that way. It's way more guesswork than other ones. So
At least in Mesopotamia, we still find texts every day.
yes,
So,
yeah,
because they wrote on clay, so we
yep.
can
And them and
at
the
least we can
Egyptians
still
wrote down
hope.
so much that we're grateful for that we can fill in a lot of history for what's going on. And
Hmm.
thank you for you guys doing that stuff. And unlike other places where it's like, man, I wish there was so much more. You guys are interesting.
The moral of the story is, if you want something to last, carve it in stone. And
Yeah.
stone carving tools are not expensive now. You could do it in your backyard, write whatever you want on a big old rock. No one's going to
And it'll
stop you.
last potentially thousands upon thousands of years, and you could become immortal,
Hmm.
just like the person who made a complaint to somebody else from the Sumeria that's that way today. And it was probably it's the oldest recorded complaint in history that we have of in terms of writing a review for
Hmm.
their product.
Yes, that's a
And you
good
could
one.
do that too.
Yes. Write up that mean old bully from high school. Say, this guy's a bully. He's a terrible person. And people will remember it. People will find it someday. Yeah.
Uh,
That's the joy. That's the joy of the ancient stuff, is that some of it's so strange and some of it's so very human.
Human.
It's
Yep.
oh, it's
Some
wonderful.
things never change, other things are like do change, and it really
Mm.
showcases what's human, what's constant, and other things that are like, man, that was just completely bizarre. That's got to be just situational to them, or that time period in the
Yeah.